So a lot of stuff has been said about autism this year, some of that being misinformation, and that misinformation ranges from silly, goofy to dangerous, scary, could potentially have serious consequences. So today, in this fluffy pink tinsel jumper, we're gonna do what we did last year in a fluffy pink tinsel jumper and talk about some of the things that celebrities, public figures, politicians have had to say about autism throughout the whole year. But a lot of this stuff is actually quite recent because I don't know, a lot of stuff's been said about autism recently, particularly the last couple of months. I don't know what's been going on. There must be something in the water, and I'm not talking about fluoride or chlorine. I don't know what it is. Our first entry, in no particular order, is Ellen. Ellen put out a Netflix special for your approval at the end of September. It has a 5.2 IMDb rating. You may know that Ellen has fallen from grace over the last few years due to allegations about a toxic work environment on the set of The Ellen Show, and also some interactions with celebrities on the show not aging particularly well, feeling pretty invasive on reflection. But Ellen's latest Netflix special has been described as an hour-long ego massage, a ramble. Also, some reviewers have claimed that the audience reactions seemed fake. I noticed this too. I don't know, I feel kind of like you'd think Ellen had just solved world hunger on stage or something like that from all of the whistling and cheering going on.
I asked Portia, I said, do you think I may have OCD? And she said, yes, you do.
And the special contained this autism-related gem that you may already be familiar with. You may have heard it from somebody that you know. I know I have. Ellen says that someone suggested to her that she might be on the spectrum. Ellen then says, I'm not on the spectrum, and I wouldn't care if I was on the spectrum, but I'm not. Okay, fine. But then she says, well, I am on the spectrum. We all are. It's a spectrum. Which then receives a huge amount of clapping and whooping.
Well, I am on the spectrum. We all are. It's a spectrum. Yeah.
It kind of hurts my hands to hear people clapping that hard. She then adds, but I'm on the part of the spectrum where someone on the spectrum would have a problem with me saying I'm on the spectrum. But I think what actually is a problem to many autistic people is this very idea that everybody is on the spectrum somewhere. Everybody's a little bit autistic. Does the fact that it's a spectrum imply that we're all on it? Well, no. Humans don't exist on a spectrum from most to least autistic. That's not how humanity works. As far as I'm aware, that's not even how the autism spectrum works. We're not a line from most to least autistic. It's way more complicated than that. I feel like I'm going to say the word spectrum way too many times in this explanation. Bear with me. Autism is a spectrum condition, so being on the autism spectrum means that you meet the diagnostic criteria for ASD, autism spectrum disorder, otherwise known as autism spectrum condition. If you do not meet that criteria, you are not considered on the spectrum from a clinical perspective. Prior to 2013, there were actually numerous different autism spectrum disorders, different subcategories of autism, because autistic people have always presented in a variety of ways. That's why it makes sense to call it a spectrum, in order to describe a vast range of autistic experiences, not a range of human experiences. And autism is not the only spectrum condition. There's also a schizophrenia spectrum, an umbrella that includes conditions such as schizoaffective disorder, which is like schizophrenia with a mood disorder, and also catatonia. Would you say that everybody is on the schizophrenia spectrum somewhere? We all have a little bit of schizophrenia, and I don't think that walking into your room and thinking your scrunched up black sweater on the bed that you see in your peripheral vision is your cat. I don't think that counts as enough of a reality distortion to mean that you're a little bit on the spectrum of schizophrenia. Do we all have a bit of fetal alcohol syndrome? Because that's another spectrum condition. It can come off as if you're implying these labels are meaningless when you try to suggest that everybody meets the criteria in some way. Later in the talk, Ellen actually does go on to say that she has OCD, and she says ADD, which is kind of an outdated way of saying ADHD, but it's still sometimes used informally. So Ellen may genuinely relate to the autistic experience more than most people do because of overlapping traits. Many autistic people are also ADHDers, and some professionals even go as far as to suggest that ADHD and autism might be kind of part of the same spectrum. So I don't know, maybe Ellen is on the spectrum. I mean, allegedly she did try to ban eye contact on set and also smelly people, Hollywood diva behavior, or autism, or both. Who knows? Wasn't very kind either way, so thumbs down for Ellen in 2024, I suppose. Number 2 on the list is a little bit more serious. It's really not great. Donald Trump went on Meet the Press earlier this month. He was asked about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is the man Trump would like to appoint as United States Secretary of Health and Human Services. But RFK Jr. is also chairman and founder of an anti-vax advocacy group. I didn't realize this, but Trump himself has actually been quite open about the fact that he believes vaccines cause autism for a very long time now, at least over 10 years. He's tweeted, "Healthy young child goes to doctor, gets pumped with massive shot of many vaccines, doesn't feel good and changes, dash autism, all caps, many such cases." So the Meet the Press moderator asks Trump, do you want to see childhood vaccines eliminated?
If they're dangerous for the children. Look.
So possibly?
When you look at some of the problems, when you look at what's going on with disease and sickness in our country, something's wrong.
The moderator then asks him directly, are you talking about autism? Meaning, autism is the something that's wrong with the United States.
Go back 25 years, autism was almost non-existent. It was, 1 out of 100,000. And now it's close to 1 out of 100.
And I'll stop you right there, Trump, because I have what you might call alternative facts from the CDC, meaning the facts from the CDC. So yes, autism diagnosis in children has been on the rise. It's actually worse, in quotation marks, than Trump would think, because the prevalence is now 1 in 36 children, not 1 in 100, as Trump claims. However, in the year 2000, it was not 1 in 100,000 children. It was 1 in 150. So not quite as big a jump in diagnosis numbers as Trump is suggesting. I don't know, maybe somehow he had a brain fart and he just added 3 extra zeros on the end of that number. We all make mistakes, I suppose, no big deal. Sarcasm, fear-mongering about autism is obviously a really big deal. As I say, this is autism diagnosis rates in children that are being measured here, not autism rates. Just because more people are being diagnosed doesn't necessarily mean there's more autism in the world. I was diagnosed at what? How old was I? 25, I think. Why have I forgotten the last few years? A bit of blur. When did I start my channel? I'm 28 now. You can work it out. But my story is not at all uncommon. We're of course better at picking up autism now, better at diagnosing it, particularly in minority groups, particularly with girls, particularly with people of color. The CDC makes this super clear in their report. I can send you a link if you want, Mr. Nearly President, if you would like, if you want to have a check over that before you make any big serious decisions or before any of your friends do. The moderator says to Trump, "Sir, going back 25 years, studies show that there is no link between vaccines and autism. Yet it sounds like you are open to the possibility of him," meaning RFK, "getting rid of them."
I'm open to
Getting
anything.
rid of them?
I think somebody has to find out.
And he repeats, if you go back 25 years, you had very little autism. The moderator responds with, well, they say it's because they're better at identifying it.
1 in 100,000, and now it's 1 in 100. That's a pretty bad number.
I mean, the stats were supposed to be 4.5 per 10,000 in the 1960s. I don't know if he's getting mixed up somewhere around there. That was not 20 years ago, obviously. And the stats, of course, would still be very wrong.
I mean, something is going on. I don't know if it's vaccines. Maybe it's chlorine in the water, right? I want them to look at everything.
Kristen, the moderator, says that childhood vaccines have prevented 4 million deaths around the world every year. Trump goes on to talk about how great he thinks the polio vaccine is and how someone would have to work really hard to convince him to get rid of that one in particular.
I'm not against vaccines. The polio vaccine is the greatest thing. If somebody told me get rid of the polio vaccine, they're going to have to work real hard to convince me.
You may notice that he doesn't completely rule out the possibility that he could be swayed on that one, which is worrying.
Certain vaccines are incredible, but maybe some aren't. But when you talk about autism, because it was brought up, and you look at the amount we have today versus 20 or 25 years ago, it's pretty scary.
Oh, God, it seems like we've never needed autism acceptance more than we do right now. Sending love to all of my fellow autistic people over in the US. Why in the year of our Lord 2024 are we still being treated as a worse disease than actual life-threatening and life-altering, life-changing, preventable diseases? Why would we rather risk things like measles, potentially even polio, like it's not completely off the table? But is it surprising Trump has made his level of regard for disabled people pretty clear? Trump then says, I've watched RFK for 25 years and he's been an interesting guy. I mean, sure, if you think that still being convinced that vaccines and fluoride in the water causes autism in 2024, if that's what you mean by interesting. I personally don't see it as interesting in a sort of, I want to give you loads of power way. Trump says somebody has to find out about the link between vaccines and autism. But somebody did find out. The autism vaccine link has been debunked. I cannot stress to you, I'm sure you watching this probably already know this, but I cannot stress to you how hard this has been debunked and how depressing it is to see this being brought up again. The myth was started in 1998 by a disgraced doctor and fraudster called Andrew Wakefield. The original study, which was on only 12 children, and some of them were not even autistic, that study has been fully retracted. H-Bomber Guy has an absolute masterpiece of a video about this. There's nothing really more that I can say on the autism vaccine front that wasn't said there. I don't know, can we set Trump and RFK up in a cinema and just play that video on a loop for the next 4 years? I really hope they do not actually put any time or money into investigating the link between autism and vaccines. Not only is that a waste of resources and deeply hurtful to autistic people, but in the past, autistic children have been seriously harmed by people trying to replicate Andrew Wakefield's findings. This resulted in one 5-year-old boy being given unnecessary surgery. He now needs round-the-clock care as a result of complications. It is completely unethical to put any more children through unnecessary, risky procedures to prove something that we already know is untrue. I wish we didn't have to be concerned about this in 2024, but it seems we do. COVID amplified the anti-vaccine movement, and social media's rapid information spread often pushes people into narrow viewpoints. This makes media literacy, understanding the source of your information, more critical than ever. And today's sponsor, Ground News, makes it easier to discern fact from fiction. Ground News is an app and website that aggregates news from 50,000 sources, allowing you to compare how different outlets are covering the same story. For each headline, they provide additional information such as the bias, factuality rating, and who owns a source. If we look at the full coverage of this story, Trump states RFK Jr. will revisit claims linking vaccines to autism. We can see that 50% of the 40 sources lean right. Additionally, only 42% of the sources are rated high factuality. And it's fascinating to compare the language used across the headlines. On the right, the phrase potential link between vaccines and autism is used 4 times, and 7 low, very low, and mixed factuality sources don't even bother with the word potential. They just come right out and say vaccine autism link. As I say, there is no link, other than a fraudster who had no regard for child safety stapling these two things together for his own financial gain. On the left, we can see that 3 sources refer to it as a discredited link. No source on the right uses the word discredited or anything similar in the headline. Ground News is so useful to me when researching for these videos. I often find myself on foreign outlets, and all of that additional information, like the political bias, the factuality, who owns the source, is invaluable. I really believe in their mission to provide transparency in the media landscape. You can check out Ground News at ground.news/nowwhat. If you sign up through my link, you'll get 50% off their Advantage plan. They're currently having their biggest sale of the year, so it might be a good idea to take advantage of that if you've been considering it. But people tell me to shut up when I talk too much about US politics, so for number 3, let's bring it back over to the UK. We got to talk about our ex-Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who is known for, in the words of this article, Brexit, general racism, and Partygate, which is when he threw parties during the COVID lockdown in the UK. Earlier this month on a podcast, Boris was asked if he saw himself as a feeling person. So Boris thinks he might be, in his words, a bit spectrumy.
I think sometimes I can be a bit spectrumy, probably.
I wish I could say it like he does.
Spectrumy, probably.
Spectrumy. You gotta get the P right. Spectrumy. So yes, it appears there are worse phrases than we're all on the spectrum somewhere. You could be a bit spectrumy. So again, which spectrum, Boris? There's a few of them. Do elaborate.
Like all men, I can sort of zone out and fail to appreciate what people are feeling, and that's a bad thing. Generally speaking, I would say I was as good as the next man at spotting what people are feeling.
So it seems like we're doing a little bit of autism is just a synonym for lacking empathy, with a splash of all men are a bit autistic because men are less empathetic than women. These are two very common myths and stereotypes about autism. I actually spoke about both of these somewhat in depth in a video I made this year. I have to look up what it's called. It's called 5 Signs of Autism. You're probably wrong about, apparently. Yes, men still are diagnosed as autistic more frequently than women, but more women and girls are starting to be diagnosed. It's tricky to know how much of this gender gap is just to do with women historically being underrepresented in research and therefore less likely to be identified because they don't fit the stereotype of autism. And it's difficult to know how much of it is to do with a genuine biological difference. Time will tell, maybe, I suppose. And some autistic people do feel like they lack empathy, but then there are other autistic people who feel like they feel too much and get kind of completely flooded by emotions. I really struggle with reading the news. I won't read the news in the morning. I'll read something horrible, get fixated on it, won't be able to kind of move past it. And sometimes that's been Boris's fault, I must say. And there's so many reasons why autistic people can seem like they're experiencing a lack of empathy when they're actually not. Your external reaction might not always reflect your internal response. Just because you don't express your feelings in the socially acceptable way doesn't mean that you're not a feeling person. I think maybe this is a bit of an unfortunate side effect about people talking about autism more, autism going mainstream. The word and associated phrases are sometimes being thrown about a bit carelessly by people who don't really know very much about autism, kind of like how people sometimes say, oh, I'm so OCD, because they like to, clean their house sometimes. But anyway, the idea that autistic people are all unfeeling robotic men is outdated. Maybe Boris was trying to talk about how he feels less in touch with his emotions because of how he was socialized as a man, which is a valid conversation, but we didn't really need to drag autism into it. Unless he genuinely suspects he is autistic, but if you do, saying you're a bit spectrumy might not be the best way to announce it to the world. Number 4. Another time when we didn't need to involve autism. Autistic was frustratingly used as a slur by a French sports journalist when commentating Formula One. It was the Austrian Grand Prix back in summer. The journalist used it to insult one of the drivers, Lance Stroll, I believe because of his way of communicating for some reason. Doesn't really matter, it was offensive either way. Apparently the commentator's colleague immediately said, "That's too strong, you're going too far." But instead of backing down, the French commentator insists, "Honestly, this is the truth." The word autistic kind of becoming a slur, being used in place of the R word, has been a theme of quite a few of my videos this year. There was a point towards the start and middle of the year when this happened where I felt like I couldn't open a TikTok or an Instagram comment section without seeing, is it autistic or is it acoustic? Sometimes, like any video of a cat doing something silly or somebody falling over or Jojo Siwa dancing, for example, it was always there. I feel like that has kind of calmed down a little bit. Maybe it's just the content I'm being exposed to at the moment. Maybe you've been seeing it everywhere. You'll have to let me know if you think this is maybe kind of chilled out and that craze is not happening so much. Although I did get a really sad comment from somebody who was talking about how they have a child in middle school who keeps using autistic as a slur even though they know their parent is autistic. That sounds so hurtful. I hope that that's not in my future at all. It would be interesting to know how much autistic is being used as a pejorative in real life, whether that's kind of calmed down a little bit at all. It seemed like it was quite a thing among young people, but I'm not young anymore, so I don't know what's going on. Someone young will have to tell me. The commentator was suspended pending an investigation. Number 5, good old Steve Bartlett has finally received some backlash this month for spreading health misinformation on his Diary of a CEO podcast. The BBC have conducted an investigation, but he isn't technically breaking any rules because podcasts are not regulated in the UK. Are they regulated anywhere? Probably not. But in an analysis of 15 health-related podcast episodes, BBC World Service found each contained an average of 14 harmful health claims that went against extensive scientific evidence. In that 8-month window, some guests billed as health experts shared accurate information, but most were spreading misleading claims. These included anti-vaccine conspiracies, stating that COVID was an engineered weapon, PCOS, autism, and other disorders can be reversed with diet. We know about that one. One of the major issues that they pointed out is that Stephen doesn't challenge his guests in any way when they come out with, things that go against consensus. He mostly stays quiet, nods along, and then helps them to promote their book at the end.
And your books as well. I will link your books below in the description for anybody that wants to read them. These 2 books in particular, 2 that I'd certainly really, really recommend.
I made a video this year talking about a section of his interview with Dr. Chris Palmer, who is a psychiatrist who has a book and tries to push the ketogenic diet as a cure for basically everything. He was talking about autism and ADHD.
You've used the word autism and ADHD as we've been speaking about metabolism. What is the link in your view?
Everything. The link is everything.
He fearmongers about autism being on the rise, kind of implies that you could cure autism by getting a bit more sleep. Why are we platforming these people? Why are we giving them a microphone and not questioning it? I guess Steve's thing is to just let people speak, freedom of speech. Or should we say, let people speak freely so that they'll say something controversial that you can put in a title and a thumbnail and clip up into a fearmongering little soundbite as well. Steve Bartlett claims that this is a nuanced approach.
I am a big fan of conversation, and I'm a big fan of having both sides of an argument and trying to make my own mind up on things and find the nuance. I find the truth is usually somewhere in the middle.
Not all ideas are equal, Steve. Putting health misinformation by people who are peddling their book next to scientific consensus and saying, oh, well, I guess the right answer is probably somewhere in the middle. That's just disingenuous.
It's some of those amazing people you talked about, like Martin Luther King, and I don't know whether it's the suffragettes or Gandhi or whoever it might be. Their ideas in their time were received equally horrifically.
The way he tries to twist his publicizing of dangerous health information, of extreme fringe ideas that he knows will perform well in the YouTube algorithm because they are extremes, the way he tries to twist that into some noble act, and I guess compare himself or this doctor to Gandhi, Martin Luther King, it's just disgusting. I personally don't like this man. I don't trust him. I never have. I've never had a good vibe. I think he is a manipulative businessman who will say or promote anything if it's gonna line his own pockets and bring him attention. And I think he's learning that conspiracy theories and fringe ideas are a great way to do just that. I mean, look at Russell Brand. And number 6, some celebrities do sadly seem to be using autism or potential autism, the potential of being a bit spectrumy, shall we say.
I can be a bit spectrumy, probably.
To excuse bad behavior. Greg Wallace, and that is Greg with 2 Gs, a host of a UK reality cooking competition, MasterChef, has recently been accused of inappropriate behavior, mostly of a sexual nature. As a result, he stepped down from MasterChef. I believe the MasterChef Christmas special did not air, and Greg Wallace has been dropped as an ambassador for the charity Ambitious About Autism. Melanie Sykes, an actually diagnosed autistic television presenter in the UK, actually came out and said that Greg Wallace was the reason she walked away from television. After these allegations were publicized, Greg came out with this bad taste apology video in which he misogynistically said it was just middle-class women of a certain age who were speaking out against him.
Now, in the newspaper, I can see the complaints coming from a handful of middle-class women of a certain age just from Celebrity MasterChef.
But it seems like he has some friends who do believe that his inappropriate behavior might be due to his autism. Now, Greg Wallace doesn't have an autism diagnosis, as far as I know. To my knowledge, he's never been open about suspecting he could be autistic prior to this backlash. He does have an autistic son, who he sometimes spends time with, but his friends do believe autism could be an underlying factor in this whole situation. Wallace has never been formally diagnosed with autism, but those closest to him argue that his actions may align with common signs of the condition. According to a close friend who wishes to remain anonymous, Wallace has often displayed an inability to read the room in quotation marks, a trait often associated with autism spectrum disorder. This has led to misinterpretation of his comments, especially in social situations where humor involving sexual content was involved. Greg always had difficulty picking up on social cues like facial expressions or tone of voice. He often makes comments that seem out of place because of this, and today's environment where jokes about sex aren't tolerated, it becomes problematic. Yeah, I mean, most of the time at the workplace, jokes about sex are not appropriate. Can we really blame all of that on being potentially autistic? Alleged sexual misconduct is not part of the diagnostic criteria. Even if you are autistic or maybe have another diagnosis that makes you impulsive, influences your behavior in some way, does that matter? The impact on others was still the same. It does feel like a convenient way to look more vulnerable and reduce culpability when you're being accused of abusing a position of power. It's just a little bit unfortunate for autistic people and for the autism acceptance movement that you chose to bring it up now. Surely if Greg did have a big issue with understanding social norms to the extent that friends knew about this and they knew that it was affecting him in a professional setting, surely he should have sought diagnosis, some sort of guidance in how to best conduct himself in the workplace prior to all of this happening. Speaking of people who maybe tried to hide behind an autism diagnosis after a controversy, I suppose maybe I could have included Sia on this list. Maybe Sia can be an honorable mention. Sia obviously got a lot of backlash from her movie about autism that she put out a few years ago called Music, but then I discovered this year that towards the end of 2023, so this is why it's an honorable mention, because it's not quite, I discovered it this year, but it actually happened last year. Towards the end of 2023, Sia went on a podcast with Zane Lowe and kind of reflected on the backlash that she received, because since then she has also been diagnosed autistic herself, and it was interesting to see how she thinks about that whole situation now. It seems like she believes that the backlash wasn't real, it didn't really come from the autistic community, it was connected to QAnon.
And then she taught me about all of the QAnon and Reddit and where things like that come from, like where all of the negativity comes from.
Anyway, I'll leave that Sia video linked if you want some more celebrity nonsense. I'll also link in the description below my longer video that I made after I watched the movie myself, and I spoke a bit about Sia's autism diagnosis and did that excuse the fact that she'd made this movie. I don't know, I guess this shows we have more work to do in 2025 on the autism acceptance front, which I guess means I'm still in a job. Would be nice if I wasn't. Like, there's no reason to make videos anymore, you know, because autism has been fully accepted. It's fine. It's boring. We all know, Meg. We all know what a spectrum is. What are you talking about? If you would like to support my content going into the new year on Patreon, you are absolutely welcome to. Even if you join the lowest tier, you can access a bunch of exclusive videos, and on the second tier and up, you can access a podcast. On the third tier, you get some outtakes from the videos as well, and then all paid members get access to the Discord server as well, so you can chat to other autistic or otherwise neurodivergent people, or just nice people, because you don't have to be diagnosed to join. Anybody is welcome there. It's a really, really lovely space. Excited to see what we get up to next year. Anyway, I hope you had a lovely Christmas. Thank you so much. I'll see you in my next video next year. And a cat just cried. Hello, did you just cry at the end? Oh, we got a cat. Bye-bye, say we'll see you next year, which is next week. That's confusing, isn't it?